So, hi everybody. My name is Donna Reed, and I'm an expert in the ACT matrix. And I today am doing a webinar on how to handle holiday occasions. Um, I want to address the sometimes not so fun things that happen around the holidays, and in particular, the events involving sitting around a table with friends and family. I'd originally given this webinar for Thanksgiving, but something went wrong with the technology and it didn't record properly. So I'm re-recording it right now, just before the Christmas holidays and New Year's and all that. And I was just thinking that while I always look forward to this day, and probably you do too, because it's supposed to be meaningful and bring us closer to the people we really care about, we often feel the angst rising as we get closer to that event and then move forward into the rest of the holiday season. So welcome to my webinar on Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, the Not So Secret Lives of Families, or FOFO, Fear of Family Occasions. So we've sent out the call to the tribe to gather, and we've received the RSPs, and we have the guest list all prepared. We know we can't put Aunt Helen next to Aunt Deirdre because Aunt Helen, once way back in high school, stole Aunt Deirdre's boyfriend. And even though that was 50 years ago, they are still not speaking. And there are other guests on the list. And I'm sure you've seen some of these. So does your guest list look like mine? We have a supervisor. I always have a supervisor. The supervisor comes into the house, walks through the front door, doesn't really say hello to anybody, heads straight for the kitchen. And if you happen to be bending over a pot, like making a really complicated sauce or gravy or a souffle or something, the supervisor is always there, leaning right over you to tell you that this is really not the right way to do this, that he or she has a much better way to do this, and they'll just take over and do it for you. By that time, you're having an anxiety attack, and all you want to do is shove them out of the kitchen. And then this one's interesting. This one you have to keep an eye on. This is the organizer. So the organizer keeps everything in front of them at their place at the table, and they keep reorganizing. So the forks have to be exactly straight and in order. The knife has to be exactly right. Everything has to be aligned perfectly, kind of OCD type, with the spoon, dessert fork, the different glasses, all this stuff. And they do this all through dinner. They keep rearranging the stuff. So as I said, keep an eye on this person. There's Nosy Nellie. Now, Nosy Nellie is really a pain in the neck. She will excuse herself to ostensibly go to the loo, but that's not really what she's after. She's after being able to check out whatever you have in your medicine cabinet and whatever rooms are next to your bathroom. So if you have anything that you really don't want spread around the neighborhood, I suggest that you put it somewhere safe. And now there's the spiller. So the spiller can never keep anything on his or her plate, or in his or her glass. And the thing here is never seat a spiller next to an organizer, because the organizer is like this, and that's a problem. Then there's the inspector. And the inspector goes ahead and he or she checks the cutlery and checks the dishes and checks the glasses to see if there are any spots. And then he or she takes a napkin and begins to really clean it all up, rub it all up. Doesn't matter if there are any spots there, they do it anyway. Well, the thing is, watch out for putting the spiller and the organizer next to this person, because that's another recipe for disaster because of the elbows. And then there's the anti-social media. And that person will start taking pictures of whatever he or she is served. Mostly this is a she. And anything that comes to the table before even taking a bite of anything. And even before taking a bite of anything, it's out on Instagram. It's amazing. And then the early leaver. I have sympathy for the early leaver. The early leaver is always ready with an excuse to slip out the door. And we know that introverts can only stand so much exposure to human connection. And that's generally a maximum of about 2 hours, and then they need to get downtime by themselves to recharge. And people who have social anxiety will react even more quickly. So the early leaver is always, as I said, ready to get out the door. Then there's the late arriver. The late arriver is always late and never has an excuse. And the issue there is sometimes the early leaver runs smack bam into the late arriver. And that can be embarrassing as well, because you have to do something about it, right? You can't just ignore it. And then there's the wine expert. I love the wine expert. The wine expert likes to tell you how your wine was the wrong choice. No matter what wine it was, no matter what dish it's served with, it's the wrong choice. But he or she never offers to bring any. So the antidote to this one is to say, well, next time you have the job of bringing the wine. And then there's a passive aggressive couple. And they spend the whole time making underhanded jabs at each other. And well, because of emotional contagion, that stuff generally gets picked up around the table and people kind of get uncomfortable with it. But what are you going to do? Then there's the nanny. The nanny's fun. She watches over everyone's eating habits. She criticizes manners, amounts taken. You took too much. Aren't you going to eat any more than that? And conversations. Do you know what you just said? Did you really mean? Goes on and on. And then there's the glutton. I love the glutton. I had one of these not too long ago. The glutton, and this is generally a guy, but I've seen women do this too. And this is at buffets. So the glutton pulls his chair up to the buffet table and blocks everybody else out and sits there and eats his fill. And once he's finished, he'll get up and leave and you get the rest. It's charming. So, whoopee, it's the holidays, and ain't we got fun. But does it really have to be this way? No, it doesn't. First, let's talk about schemas. Talk about what? So, schemas, what are they? Well, schemas are mental maps or patterns of behavior that are laid down really, really early in life. When starts off when we're babies, we start looking around and start encoding and start trying to make sense of things at one level or another. And so schemas are like mental maps, and they're held outside of conscious awareness. They're buried in your limbic system back here. They get encoded, as I said, in early childhood, and we have them for absolutely everything. We have ones that help us get through life, like we have a schema for how to cross the street, but that's very helpful. And then we have the ones that don't, and these are known as maladaptive schemas. And these schemas get activated by something that happens in the environment, and before we know it, we're behaving in ways that are downright unhelpful and really contrary to who we are. We just don't know why we behave the way we do when that stuff happens. So what are they? So there are 19 maladaptive schema, and this is the work of Dr. Jeffrey Young, and it's amazing work. There are 10 of these that affect interpersonal relations. And when these are triggered, we always respond with a fight, a flight, or a freeze response. And those responses can take on a variety of behaviors. To give you an example, emotional deprivation can trigger social isolation. Emotional deprivation is a schema. So some child who's been emotionally deprived will have this need to have emotions met. And when he or she feels they're not, and that schema gets triggered, they'll go into social isolation. And that's a protective response. It's a flight response. Then mistrust and abuse, which is another schema. So that can trigger a fight or a flight response as well. And then subjugation. So subjugation can trigger self-sacrifice, doing everything you possibly can to please somebody else, to be liked or accepted. And that is a freeze response. We give up our own will and our own ability to control. So it's not the job of this webinar to go into deep schema theory, but rather merely to introduce the notion that our behaviors are not always under the control of the conscious mind and may be driven by forces out of conscious awareness. So think about this for yourself and for your relationships, particularly the stressful ones. And this really applies to holidays, so think about this. Here is a list of the 10 unhelpful mental schema that, when activate, trigger coping behaviors that get in the way of relationships. And I'm not going to go over the list. You may go to my website and download a copy for yourself if you like. But suffice it to say that schema coping behaviors, like the fight, or the fleas response, in whatever variety that behavior takes, are always in the service of avoiding the pain of the activated schema. So for instance, when emotional deprivation gets triggered, we're feeling really bad. It hurts. And so we've got to get away from those yucky feelings that show up inside and that just don't feel good. And, you know, society tells us that we absolutely don't have the right not to feel good. It bothers other people. So how do we know a schema gets activated? Well, something first of all shows up in our body, and it can be like a tight chest, or suddenly your shoulders are up to here, or they're coming in like this, or your body's bending over, or you might feel a little chill, or a variety of things. And then we feel a rush of adrenaline or cortisol, any of the stress hormones. And we start to feel an emotion such as anger or fear or anxiety. And then we start to have the FFF response thoughts. And then we act out the FFF response. Are we in our normal minds? We are in our limbic systems, in our non-conscious minds, and we don't even know it. So let's look at the brain. I'm going to invite you to raise your hand like this, and following that diagram, take your thumb and move it inward. Now, close your fist. Once you put your thumb across your palm, close your fist. And now bend your wrist. This is Dan Siegel's model of the brain, and it's a really great one because it makes it really simple to understand. So think of the tips of your fingernails as your prefrontal lobe, your executive function. And up here is think of this now as, these are controlled by the frontal lobes of your brain. And then behind your fingers, up here is your neocortex. And the top of your hand represents the cortex, and your wrist represents your brainstem. Now, I'm going to ask you to open your hand and I'm going to ask you to open your hand and look at your thumb. Your thumb is located where your limbic system is inside your brain. Among other functions, it stores all of the events that have ever occurred in your life. So when something happens in your environment and that information is triggered, or rather is transferred to your limbic brain, it goes in through your cortex and it bounces back into your limbic system. And it takes like 0.7 seconds, not even, it's like bam. It gets in there and it gets evaluated for threat. So think of that evaluation as perhaps you're traveling to a foreign country. And of course there's customs and you have to go through it. So you have to present your passport and the guys there check your passport. And if everything's good, they go bam and you go through. So this is what happens in your limbic system. The event comes in through here, it goes back. Your limbic system checks out, the event, says, okay, this is not a threat, bam, okay, move forward. However, if that same information, if information goes back and it gets checked out and your limbic system thinks, this is a threat, something like this happened in the past and this is really connected to it, we've got to do something about it. So the order goes out immediately for stress hormones to begin flooding the body and prepare it for either a fight, a flight, or a freeze response. So you may think at this point that you are in your cortex, but you're not. You're reacting from your limbic brain, which operates outside of conscious awareness. And a good example of this is an entitlement schema. Now, people with entitlement schemas think that they have the right to everything. And we all know people like that. So it becomes particularly dangerous when you're driving. And so if you run into somebody who has an entitlement schema and is on the road and gets road rage because he or she feels like you're driving too slowly and they're right on your bumper, you want to take that into account and immediately move over to another lane, because those people are not in their conscious, they're not in their conscious minds, they're back in their limbic system, and you don't know what they're going to do. And actually, they don't know what they're going to do either. And I live in Denver, Colorado, and this past year, unfortunately, we've had several incidents, I think 3 of them, where someone with road rage actually followed the person who enraged him. And in all 3 cases, it was a he who enraged him and actually killed them. And the worst one was this guy who felt that the woman in front of him was driving too slowly. And he followed her to the dentist's office where she was taking her 3 kids. They got out of the car and this guy shot them and shot all of them. He killed 3 of them and 2 of them survived. And one of them is still in the hospital in critical condition. And this was months ago. So take these things very, very, very seriously. So how do we calm a triggered schema? Well, first of all, we look for tightness. As I said before, we look for tightness in our bodies. We look for tension in our shoulders, our backs, our necks, could be in our jaws. And then we look for things going on in our stomachs, in our bellies, our hearts. Sometimes it's our throats. Sometimes a part of our bodies will get hot or cold or tingly or both. Get to know your body because your body holds an immense amount of information. It's extremely wise and it can tell you what you need to know. So we also use, this is part of using awareness. This is somatic or body awareness. And once we can get a hold of that, and we have to do it very quickly because when the schema gets triggered, it moves to the limbic system instantaneously. So you have to really know your body. Then you begin to breathe. And when you breathe, you do this deep, deep, slow belly breathing, breathing in deeply to the count of 4 or 5, holding and then exhaling very slowly also, holding at the top of the breath, and then inhaling again very, very slowly into the belly, not into the upper chest. And it takes about 30 seconds to a minute to get your cortex back under control and to begin to think differently. And so we can do those things, and then we can also create a matrix. So let's see how we can do that. So I'm just going to assume that everybody watching this knows the matrix, and even if you don't, you're going to find it really easy to follow. So the landscape, the basic matrix is sort of a landscape diagram. It's a 4-square window on the self and on the situation. So above the horizontal line, you have the physical world, the world of the 5 senses. So sight, taste, hearing, smell, touch, anything that you can get at here in the real world. Below that horizontal line is the world inside your head. And there isn't too much difference between the world inside your head and the world outside your head. Actually, whether you're thinking something or experiencing something, your brain kind of fires the same way. So just keep that one in mind as well. So the right arrow points toward. And what we mean by that is that it's pointing toward things that you can do that are going to get you closer to who or what's important to you. The left arrow points away, and that just simply means that those would be moves or behaviors that give you less of what you want and take you further away from who or what's important. And it's nice to remember that an away move is not always an away move. You know, if you're standing in the middle of a street and all of a sudden a truck comes barreling down on you, well, you want to move away, and that's a good away move. So let's go to the lower right. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to answer this question because I don't have a chat box since this is just a recording. Who or what is important to you this holiday season? So I'm going to say my family, like my kids, my partner, my friends, having really peaceful holidays, having people I love around me, having compassion and connection, and good food and good times and good memories. Those are things that are important to me for the holidays. So you think of some yourself, and while you do that, think of somebody who's really important to you, somebody that you really care about. And then I invite you to close your eyes and just imagine a time when you felt really, really close to that person. And just notice when you do that, what happens in your body. Did you feel some sensation of peace, of goodness? If you did, that means that you are being flooded by the hormones that make you feel good. You could, like oxytocin, what is known as the cuddle hormone. Remember, if you think about holding a baby or holding a pet, those feelings that you get that are really warm and cuddly, or if your partner or your husband or wife's holding you and really tenderly, then it could be also some dopamine. This is really, I'm really getting something done here. Or it could also be some serotonin, any of those, and they're more than just those. So that is the feeling that you get when you move toward something or something that's important, either who or what's important to you. Now, sometimes, even though we care a lot about people, things happen. We might have an argument, or there might be a misunderstanding. And so then other things show up. So we think of that as the yucky stuff that shows up inside of us and gets in the way. So sometimes people will say anger or fear or anxiety, or I feel rejected, I don't belong here, I know that person hates me, I know she hates my dress, just look at the way she's looking at me, oh look, she's whispering to the neighbor, I know she's talking about me, and all this kind of stuff that goes on in our heads. So again, I invite you to close your eyes and just remember a time when something like that happened to you, and notice what happens inside your body. Yeah, did you notice feelings of maybe some anxiety, some stress, something else rolling through your system that was very, very different from when you looked at the moving toward feelings? Yeah. So you're getting a feeling for the stress hormones, the adrenaline, the cortisol, the catecholamines, the norepinephrine, all of those, getting your body ready for a fight, flight, or freeze response. And that's what happens when the yucky stuff shows up inside of us and gets in the way. So what do we do? I mean, we're humans. We want to get away from the yucky stuff that shows up inside of us. It doesn't feel good. Society wants us to feel good, and we don't want to feel bad either. So we want to get away from it. So we'll do things like some people will say, well, they drink, or they sleep, or they play computer games, or they go shopping, or they run, or they do a variety of things. And these are almost always things that solve the problem of the yucky stuff that shows up inside in the short term. It doesn't get rid of it in the long term, and it doesn't get you any closer to who or what's important. And that also is important to remember, that the upper left, those actions in the upper left are avoidance moves, and they do not get you closer to who or what's important, but they do make you feel better most of the time. And sometimes, there's some things like drinking or taking drugs that can actually cause really serious problems over the long term. So what can we do to avoid this? Well, we can move to the upper right. And in the upper right, we can say, what can I do to make this a happy holiday? Well, we can take a deep breath and decide what you want to have. So some of the things that we think about some of the things that we could do that could bring us closer to the people we care about and the kind of holiday season we want to have happen. And we can take a breath and decide what it is that we want to have happen. And then we can make a toward move. So what would that look like? So if a situation is getting tense, and what you want to do is to quiet the stress hormones flowing through a person's brain and body, and also through your own. You want to do what we call down-regulating the stress hormones and up-regulating the hormones that will bring about a sense of togetherness. How do you do this? Well, first you do it with your own breath. And as you can bring yourself into a place of of more calm, and you can downregulate your own stress hormones. The person that you're speaking with is also going to begin to mirror your own nervous system. That's what we have mirror neurons for. And then we start to reinforce the types of conversations that inspire transparency, relationship building, understanding, truth, and empathy. So trust is the feeling that I'm safe and I know you won't hurt me. And the feeling of trust is associated with the brain's reward center, which is located in the prefrontal cortex or the executive brain. The feeling of distrust, I am not safe, and I think you may hurt me, is associated with the brain's intense emotions such as fear of loss and fear of threat, and it's located in the limbic brain. Again, there we go, schema. So another thing that we can do at this point is to use reflective listening. So we can connect with the other person to process the situation together, to share a story about the situation, facts, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, conclusions. And when we use reflective listening, we really start off by feeding back to the person exactly what we heard that person say. And we do this for a couple of reasons. One, to let the person know that we actually heard correctly, and if not, to offer the opportunity to be corrected. And second, to be able to begin to think, okay, so what kind of response can I give to this that would actually be a toward move? And the trick here too is to listen without any judgment at all. This is a very neutral activity. We talk about something called the observer self, where you take a 30,000 foot view of what's going on. So you're kind of getting outside of your body and looking down on the situation. And you also discover the ripple effect that this has on others at the table. And remember that emotion is contagious, so others are picking it up. And then partner to discuss what actions you can both or all take with each other for better outcome in the present moment. So these are just some of the suggestions that I had for you today, and I'm sure you will have some ideas of your own. The main thing is to calm people down and bring them back into their prefrontal cortex where they can make toward moves. So that's how we have happy holidays. And the yucky stuff just doesn't get in the way anymore, even though, of course, it does show up and always will because we're humans. So thank you for attending this webinar, which was sponsored by the ACTS Matrix Academy, or TAMA, and by ProSocial Dynamics LLC, my own firm. And it's our hope that this presentation will make your holiday dinners more fun and companionable. The slides are available on my website at www.prosocialdynamics.com. And I also wanted to let you know that if you want to learn more about the matrix, about schema management, about prosocial communications for both work and play, then by all means contact me, and you have my contact information below. I provide consulting and training, especially in the effects of maladaptive emotional schemata on the workplace environment. I'm a PhD candidate in organizational systems, as well as a certified prosocial matrix communications process consultant, which is a whole mouthful, so let's just call it PMCP. Another announcement is that the ACT Matrix Academy has launched the Prosocial Matrix Communication Process, PMCP, certification program. So many people have already taken this next step and have gotten their certification in PMCP and have joined our growing community of individuals from all walks who want to use the matrix to make a difference. And we have a growing and vibrant community. It's really turning into a tribe. And while certification is not required to use the PMCP, you may find that it does help open doors for you and it gives you some credibility. There is a fee for certification. It's a small fee, and it's used to cover our overhead costs, including the costs of maintaining the website and paying mentors who help with the training, and then some other costs. We do have a sliding scale for the cost of certification. So if it seems outside of your range, just email Dr. Polk at kevin@drpolk.com and ask for a discount code. And if you're interested in certification, please use the link below. See you at TAMA.